G'day, my name's Jimmy. How you going? Look, I know I look a bit preppy, but can you go with it? At my church youth group, we're doing a series on God's love. I know what you're thinking. That sounds pretty youth groupy. Another week doing the basics. And that's what I thought too. But you have no idea. The last couple of weeks at my youth group have been seriously weird. Let me explain. 2 weeks ago, we meet on Friday nights. Our youth leader, his name's Gary, he stood up and he gave a talk that I reckon I've heard in church about 3 times a week for the last billion years. It was about the usual stuff, God loves people, we're all important, that because God loves us, our lives have meaning. I wish I had $1 for every time I'd been told that. Okay, so far this story's like any other, but listen up. The next week, Gary stood up. I think he was planning to keep talking about the same sort of thing. But then this girl, Liz, she's been coming for ages. She interrupts and she's not happy. She says to him, "Last week you said to me that God loved me, that he cares about me and he wants to be my friend. I was thinking that was pretty cool, so I went home and I was thinking about how great it was that God was my special friend. But then I opened my Bible and I started reading stuff and I read this Bible passage that said God was a special friend of the poor, and I wasn't happy. You told me that God loved me, that the whole point of Christianity is that God loves me. And now I find out that God actually cares about other people more than me, and I'm not happy." And the room went quiet, deathly quiet. We'd never heard anyone say this kind of thing before. We were all watching Gary. We weren't even sure if he knew what to say. There was such a long pause. It was awkward. You could hear a pin drop. But then, after a gap as wide as the harbour bridge, Gary spoke. He said something I wasn't expecting. He said, "Liz, if you had to sum up the message of Christianity in as few words as you can, what would you say?" And then there was another long pause while Liz thought. And then she said, "God loves you?" And Gary smiled. He said, "I was pretty sure you were going to say that. And the reason why I was pretty sure is because that's what I've been telling you, and that's what a lot of other people tell you." Now, I was with him up to this point, but then he said something I absolutely was not expecting. He said, "Liz, the problem with your description of Christianity is it's too long. Can you shorten it for me?" Too long? Yeah, right. Liz had it down to 3 words. And then there was another long pause while Liz thought. "How can I shorten the message of Christianity down from 3 words? I said 3 words. All I said was God loves you." And Gary smiled. "Try," he said. "And here's a challenge for you. You can only use the 3 words you used before." I was going to call out and just say the word "you," but it just didn't seem like the right time. At that moment, I think Liz, she was just like me. She was thinking about which one of the words she could remove. There weren't many possibilities. I thought about each of them and none of them seemed of much use. Of course, I didn't say it out loud, but at that point I thought Gary was a couple of kangaroos short of a top paddock. And then Gary spoke, and I'm pretty sure I've never heard him say anything better. He said, "The message of Christianity is only 2 words, not 3. God loves." And God isn't asking you, he is commanding you to love him and to love people like he does. So being friends with God is not about getting out of bed thinking about how to love yourself, although you do need to love yourself. It's about hanging around with God instead. Hanging around with God means loving the things he loves and doing the things he does. So if he loves the poor, you love the poor. And if he decides to tell that kid at school you don't like about him, then that's what you do too. And if he decides to rest, then you rest with him. That's how God loves you. By Jesus dying for you on the cross to take the punishment for your wrongdoing so that you could live with him and do what he does, not so you could spend your whole life thinking about how much you're loved. Does that help? There was a long pause. No one said anything. This was the first time anyone had described Christianity like that before. I looked around the room. People were digging it. It was so simple. I heard this week from a mate who ran into Gary. He said that he's going to be doing something completely different at youth group tonight. My mate said he's sick and tired of asking kids to volunteer at youth group and church. So get this, he's going to tell people that he's giving up. Well, kind of. He is going to ask if anyone will volunteer, but it's not just for a week or two. He's planning to ask people if they want to volunteer for the rest of their lives. But I can't stay chatting. I'm about to go to youth group now, and I don't want to be late. If you want to know what I think, and please don't tell him, I think Gary's a bit crazy. He'll never get anyone. I mean, I'm planning to sign up. I just don't think anybody else will.